when the room filled with memories. The night was quiet, yet full of a strange electricity. Keanu Reeves stepped into the small private gathering room of an old Hollywood studio. It wasn't filled with lights or cameras. Only a soft golden glow from the lamps that lined the walls. People had gathered to celebrate years of cinema, and the air carried the weight of shared history. But Keanu wasn't thinking about the others. His heart beat a little faster because he knew she was there. Sandra Bullock, the woman who had walked into his life decades ago on a movie set, when both of them were younger, uncertain, and unaware of how their bond would shape them. As soon as he entered, his eyes found her. She was standing near the corner, her laugh warm, her presence the same as it had always been, bright, genuine, and comforting. For a moment, Keanu froze. Memories of their younger days rushed back. The days of filming Speed, when long hours on set had turned into conversations that stretched deep into the night. He remembered the small things. How she used to hide nervousness with humor. How her kindness wasn't an act. How she made everyone around her feel seen. Time had passed, but in that instant it felt like no time had gone at all. Sandra looked up and their eyes met. Her smile softened, almost as if she too had been carried back to those days. She stepped forward and suddenly the room seemed smaller, quieter, as if the world was waiting for the moment they would speak again. "Keanu," she said, her voice low but full of warmth. He answered with the same gentle nod that had always been his way of showing care. "Sandra," he replied. No cameras were rolling, yet it felt like a scene written for them. The beginning of their conversation was simple, but behind every word was something deeper. They spoke of old times, of moments that had seemed ordinary back then but now felt precious. Sandra reminded him of the day he had carried her lunch when she was too exhausted to move from her chair. And he smiled, recalling how she had once surprised him with a birthday cake on set, even though he hadn't told anyone it was his birthday. These were not grand stories to the world, but to them, they were reminders of who they were when the fame was still new. When their bond was built on kindness and respect, not on headlines but beneath the smiles and laughter, there was something unspoken. Both of them knew that life had taken them down different paths. Years of separate journeys, different choices, personal battles fought in silence. Keanu had endured loss after loss, moments of loneliness that would have broken many men. Sandra had faced her own heartbreaks, betrayals, and the struggle of raising her children in the spotlight. Yet here they were, standing together again, two souls who had walked through storms but still carried light within them. As the conversation deepened, the people around them began to notice. Some whispered, others simply smiled. There was something magnetic about the way Keanu and Sandra leaned in when the other spoke. Something pure in the way their laughter rose above the hum of the room. It was as if the years had melted away, as if time had been waiting for this reunion. But just when it seemed like the night would remain calm, a small moment of tension appeared. A guest, perhaps too bold, made a careless remark about their past, suggesting that their connection had been nothing but Hollywood gossip. The words hung in the air, sharp and out of place. Sandra's face fell for a moment and Keanu's jaw tightened. The room grew quiet, waiting for how they would react. Keanu's response was not anger. Instead, he spoke with the quiet strength that defined him. "What we had," he said softly, "was real. It wasn't gossip. It was respect. And respect doesn't fade with time." His words carried weight and the room shifted. Sandra's eyes filled with emotion because she knew he wasn't just defending their past. He was speaking of something larger, about the value of kindness, about bonds that go beyond fame, about the human need to be remembered for who we truly are. The night continued, but now there was a new energy in the air. The careless words had been turned into a powerful moment, one that reminded everyone present of the beauty of sincerity. When Sandra placed her hand gently on Keanu's arm, the room seemed to exhale. Happiness, quiet and true, began to fill the space. Not the loud joy of parties or awards, but the deep happiness of two people remembering who they were, and realizing that even after everything, the best parts of themselves remained. Keanu looked at Sandra and thought of all the times in his life when the world had felt cold and unforgiving. Tonight was different. Tonight, in this room with her beside him, he felt something he hadn't felt in a long time. Peace. And for the first time in years, he allowed himself to believe that sometimes the past can return, not to haunt us, but to heal us. When memories turned into questions the following morning, Keanu sat by the window of his quiet home, a cup of coffee untouched in his hands. Sleep had barely touched him. The night replayed in his mind like an unfinished film. He could still hear Sandra's laughter echoing, still see the kindness in her eyes. But what stayed with him most was the silence that had followed after his words about respect and sincerity. It was as if that silence carried all the things they had never said before. Now alone, he wondered if last night had been only a moment, or the beginning of something he had long stopped expecting. Sandra, too, carried the weight of the evening with her. In her home, she walked slowly around her living room, her children's drawings pinned to the walls, her life full yet touched with the memory of that smile she had seen on Keanu's face. She had felt safe in that room with him, safe in a way she hadn't felt in years. But questions began to rise within her heart. Why did fate bring him back into her path now? After all the storms they both had endured, why was it now, at this point in their lives, that their worlds crossed again? Later that day, an unexpected message arrived for Keanu. It was from an old friend in the industry, someone who had been at the gathering. "People are talking," the message read. "They saw you and Sandra together. They think there's more between you." Keanu sighed. He knew how Hollywood worked. People turned small sparks into stories, whispers into headlines. But what worried him wasn't the gossip. It was how it might affect Sandra. She had fought hard to build a private life, to protect her children, to stay grounded in a world that thrived on noise. Would this sudden attention hurt her? As he wrestled with his thoughts, the phone rang. It was Sandra. Her voice was calm, but beneath it was a layer of worry. "Keanu," she said softly, "have you seen the articles?" He hadn't, but now he understood. The press had already twisted their reunion into a story of rekindled romance, full of dramatic headlines. Sandra sighed. "I don't mind what they say about me, but I can't let it affect my kids." Her words carried a heaviness that struck Keanu deeply. He knew her pain. He knew what it meant to protect loved ones from the harshness of the spotlight. "Sandra," he said gently, "they don't know the truth, and the truth is ours to protect, not theirs to decide." His voice steadied her, reminding her of the strength he had always carried. But then came the question she hadn't expected. "Keanu, do you ever think about us? About what could have been?" The silence after her words stretched long and fragile. Keanu leaned back in his chair, closing his eyes. Of course he had thought about it. There were nights when he had replayed their moments on set, their laughter, the comfort they found in each other's company. But he had never spoken it aloud, never dared to, until now. "I do," he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. "I've thought about it many times, but life, it chose different paths for us." Sandra felt her chest tighten. His honesty was both a comfort and a wound. She too had wondered in quiet moments about the life that could have existed if they had dared to step beyond friendship. But those doors had closed long ago. Or had they? Their conversation ended on a soft note, but the questions lingered. In the days that followed, rumors grew louder. Photos of them from the event were shared everywhere. Speculation filled the headlines, and once again, their names were bound together in ways they had not chosen. Sandra found herself standing before her children, trying to explain why strangers were asking about Uncle Keanu, as if he were suddenly part of their lives again. The innocence in her children's eyes made her realize something. This wasn't just about gossip. It was about what she wanted her future to look like, and who she wanted to walk beside her. One evening, as the sun set over the city, Sandra made a decision. She invited Keanu to her home, not as a star, not as a co-worker from long ago, but as the man who had once meant more to her than she dared admit. When he arrived, the air between them was filled with both comfort and tension. Her children had already gone to bed, the house quiet except for the ticking of a clock. Sandra sat across from him, her hands clasped tightly. "Keanu," she began, "we can't control the world, but maybe we need to decide what this is. For us." Keanu looked at her, his face calm yet shadowed with thought. "Do you want the truth, Sandra?" he asked. She nodded. His eyes softened, and for the first time in years, his guard lowered. "The truth is, I never stopped caring about you, not once. Through everything, you've always been here." He tapped his chest lightly over his heart. Her breath caught because in that moment she realized her own truth mirrored his. But admitting it out loud was terrifying. Love at this stage of life came with risks, with responsibilities, with the possibility of breaking what was already fragile. Before she could answer, a sound interrupted them. It was faint but sharp, a camera shutter coming from outside the window. Both froze, realizing the truth they were just beginning to face might already be in the hands of strangers. Someone had been watching. Someone had captured the moment. Their reunion, so personal and sacred, was no longer just theirs. When the world intruded, the next morning, Sandra woke to the sound of her phone buzzing endlessly. Texts from friends, messages from her team, missed calls from numbers she didn't recognize. She rubbed her eyes, already sensing what had happened. With trembling hands, she opened one of the links sent by her manager. There it was, her home, her private sanctuary splashed across tabloids. Photos of Keanu leaving her house. A shadowy figure outside the window, headlines screaming words she hadn't spoken. Secret romance, rekindled flames, Keanu and Sandra late-night confession. Her heart sank. It wasn't just speculation anymore. It was invasion. At the same time, Keanu sat in his car, staring at the same headlines on his screen. He had lived through countless waves of rumors before, but this felt different. This wasn't about a movie role or some baseless gossip. This was about Sandra, about her children, about the fragile space they had only just begun to explore together. He clenched his jaw, torn between the instinct to remain silent and the desire to protect her from the noise. He knew silence often made things worse, but speaking could make it dangerous too. Later that day, Sandra and Keanu met again, this time in a quiet corner of a small cafe known for protecting its guests. She wore a cap low over her face, he kept his head down, yet even in their effort to stay hidden, their connection couldn't be disguised. When they finally sat across from each other, the air was heavy with unspoken worry. "They're going after my kids, Keanu," Sandra whispered, her eyes glistening. "They've parked outside the school. Cameras everywhere. This isn't just about us anymore." Her voice cracked, and he felt the weight of her fear sink into him like stone. Keanu leaned closer, his voice steady, but filled with quiet determination. "I'll handle it, Sandra. You don't have to go through this alone." She looked at him, searching his face, and saw that same strength she had admired for decades. The strength that came not from power or fame, but from his ability to endure pain and still offer kindness. But even as she found comfort in his words, doubt lingered in her chest. She had built her life around stability for her children, and now everything felt fragile. Their conversation was interrupted by a stranger's voice. "Excuse me, are you two?" The man froze mid-sentence, realizing who they were. In an instant, Sandra's body tensed. Keanu simply gave the man a quiet look, and the man backed away, muttering apologies. But the damage was done. Sandra felt her chest tighten as reality closed in. Every step they took now would be watched, analyzed, judged. That night, Sandra sat on her porch alone, watching the stars. Memories of her younger self came rushing back. When she had been bold enough to take risks, brave enough to laugh in the face of gossip. But now she wasn't just Sandra Bullock, actress. She was a mother, a protector, a woman who had built walls around her heart so no one could break it again. Yet Keanu's presence was tearing those walls down, and for the first time in years, she wondered if maybe that was exactly what she needed. Keanu, meanwhile, found himself standing in front of an old mirror in his home, looking at his reflection with rare honesty. "What are you doing?" he asked himself softly. He had spent years keeping his life private, living quietly away from Hollywood's chaos. But now, for Sandra, for the possibility of something real, he felt the pull to step back into the storm. Was it worth it? His mind whispered caution, but his heart already knew the answer. Days turned into a week, and the noise around them only grew louder. Paparazzi followed, stories multiplied, and even friends began to ask questions. In the middle of it all, Sandra's children noticed her restlessness. One night, her daughter asked innocently, "Mom, why do people care so much about Uncle Keanu?" The question pierced her heart. She smiled weakly and answered, "Because sometimes people see happiness and want to make a story out of it." But deep inside, she knew this was no simple story. It was their lives. When Sandra finally met Keanu again, it wasn't in a cafe or a gathering. It was in the quiet of his home. Away from the flashes, away from the whispers. She walked in slowly, her eyes searching his. "Keanu," she began, "I don't know if I can do this. The world won't leave us alone." Her voice shook, and for a moment fear seemed stronger than hope. But Keanu stepped closer, his gaze steady, his tone calm. "Sandra, the world has never left us alone. Not when we were young, not now. The question is, do we let them decide for us, or do we decide for ourselves?" She looked at him and something shifted. She realized that all her life she had been fighting to control every piece of the story. But maybe true strength was not in control. It was in trust. Trust in him. Trust in herself. Trust in the bond that had survived decades of silence and distance. Before she could answer, a knock echoed at the door. Both of them froze, tension rising. Keanu moved toward the door cautiously, his body tense. When he opened it, he didn't find flashing cameras or strangers. He found someone unexpected, a figure from the past, someone neither of them had seen in years. The sight of this person made Sandra gasp and Keanu's expression turn unreadable. Their reunion had just taken a turn. Neither of them saw coming. When the past knocked on the door, Keanu's hand lingered on the doorknob, his breath steady but heavy. When the door swung open, the light from the hallway spilled in, framing a figure both familiar and distant. It was Janet, an old friend who had worked closely with them during the filming of Speed. Her hair was touched with silver now, but her eyes still carried the sharpness of someone who had seen too much of Hollywood's hidden world. Sandra gasped softly, her heart racing. It had been years since she had seen Janet. They had shared long nights on set, private talks during the chaos, and promises that time eventually scattered. But what shook Sandra most was the look on Janet's face. It wasn't joy at reuniting. It was concern, almost fear. "I didn't mean to intrude," Janet said quietly, stepping inside as Keanu motioned for her to enter. "But I needed to warn you both. You're in the center of something bigger than you realize." Her words carried weight, each syllable sharp as glass. Keanu's brows furrowed. "What do you mean?" Janet sighed, her shoulders slumping. "The photos of you two, those weren't an accident. Someone leaked them on purpose. It's not just paparazzi chasing a story. Someone in the industry wants this noise. They're stirring it, feeding it, trying to pull both of you back into a spotlight you never asked for." Sandra felt her stomach twist. She had suspected as much, but hearing it out loud made her chest tighten. "But why?" she whispered. "We're not even working together." "Why target us?" Janet looked between them, her voice dropping lower. "Because together, you two represent something the industry can't control. You're proof that real connections, real respect, and real kindness still exist, and some people don't want that. They want headlines, scandals, easy stories that sell. They're not going to let this go quietly." A silence fell over the room. Keanu paced slowly, his jaw tight, his hands clenched. Sandra sat still, the weight of Janet's warning pressing down on her. For years, she had carefully protected her peace. Now it felt like someone had cracked open the walls of her life, dragging her children, her memories, her future into a storm. Keanu finally stopped pacing. "Then we need to decide, do we hide or do we face it head on?" His voice was calm, but the edge of determination was unmistakable. Sandra's eyes lifted to him. Part of her longed to run, to retreat, to return to the quiet life she had built. But another part, the part that remembered their laughter, their respect, their unspoken bond, knew that running would only make them prisoners of fear. Janet placed a hand on Sandra's shoulder. "Be careful," she said softly. "Whatever you decide, the world is watching, and not everyone watching wants to see you happy." After Janet left, the silence between Sandra and Keanu was filled with unspoken thoughts. Sandra looked at him, her eyes shimmering. "Do you ever wonder," she asked softly, "if this is fate? If after all these years the universe put us here for a reason?" Keanu met her gaze, his voice steady but tender. "I don't wonder," he said. "I believe it." Her heart trembled at his words, and for the first time in years she allowed herself to imagine a life where she didn't have to carry her battles alone. But just as warmth began to settle between them, Keanu's phone buzzed sharply. He glanced at the screen and frowned. It was an unknown number, but the message chilled him to his core. "Walk away from her or the world will know everything you've tried to keep private." Keanu's breath caught. He had always lived quietly, guarding his wounds from the public eye. Whoever sent that message knew enough to threaten him where it hurt most. He showed the phone to Sandra, and her face paled. "Keanu, what are they talking about?" His silence was answer enough. There were parts of his past he had never shared. Not with the world, not with her. Shadows he had learned to live with. Now it seemed those shadows were being dragged into the light. Sandra reached for his hand. "Whatever it is," she whispered, "we'll face it together." Her words gave him strength, but inside, he knew the storm was only just beginning. When secrets surfaced, Keanu sat in silence long after showing Sandra the threatening message. The words glowed on his phone screen like fire he couldn't put out. For most of his life, he had chosen silence over explanation, humility over defense. He had never been the kind of man to chase attention or correct every rumor. But this was different. Whoever was behind this wasn't after gossip. They wanted to wound him through her. Sandra leaned closer, her voice steady though her hands trembled. Keanu, if there's something you're hiding, I need to know. Not because I'm afraid of what people will say, but because I don't want to be blindsided. If we're in this together, you have to trust me. Keanu's eyes softened. He rarely let people step into the private corners of his heart, but with her the walls began to fall. Sandra, the truth is, I've carried a lot of pain. I've lost people I loved, my girlfriend, my daughter, my family. People think they know the story, but they don't. They don't see the nights when I wanted to disappear, when loneliness felt heavier than life itself. I kept it hidden because the world doesn't want to see weakness in men like me. But someone out there, they know the details I've never spoken, and they want to use it. His voice cracked as he spoke, and Sandra's heart ached for him. She reached out and took his hand in hers, holding it tightly as if to remind him he wasn't alone anymore. Keanu, she whispered, that isn't weakness. It's survival. It's proof that you're stronger than anyone knows. If they try to use your pain against you, we'll show them that pain doesn't define you. Kindness does. Resilience does. Her words washed over him like a balm, and for the first time he let himself breathe deeply, feeling the weight lighten just a little. But even as they sat in that fragile moment of truth, the storm outside grew louder. The next day, the story broke. Headlines screamed about Keanu's past tragedies, painting them with cruel exaggeration. Pictures of him in his younger years were splashed across magazines, twisted into narratives that weren't his. Reporters camped outside his home. Questions were shouted, microphones shoved into his path. And at the center of every article was his connection to Sandra. The message was clear. The world wanted to turn their quiet bond into a spectacle of tragedy and romance. Sandra saw the way it hurt him, though he never complained. He walked with quiet dignity, never lashing out, never showing anger. But she saw the heaviness in his shoulders, the distant look in his eyes. One evening, as they sat together in her living room, she turned to him with a fierce resolve. Keanu, I've let them tell my story before. I've let them twist my life into headlines. I'm not letting them do it to you. Not this time. He looked at her, surprised by the fire in her voice. What are you saying? I'm saying, she replied firmly, we go public. On our terms. Not through paparazzi, not through tabloids, but through our voices. We tell the truth. Not the gossip version, not the cruel version. The real one. And we remind people that respect and kindness matter more than scandal. Keanu hesitated. The thought of opening himself up terrified him. But when he looked at Sandra, he realized she was offering him something rare. The chance to take back control. Not by fighting with anger, but by standing in honesty. 2 days later, they agreed to sit down for an interview with a trusted journalist. The decision sent shockwaves through the industry. Everyone expected drama, secrets, tears. But what they got was something entirely different. Under the soft lights of the interview set, Sandra spoke first. She spoke of their friendship, their respect, their history. She reminded the world that what made Keanu special was not his fame but his humanity, his humility, his quiet acts of kindness, his resilience through heartbreak. When it was his turn, Keanu spoke with the same honesty he had shown her. He didn't deny the pain of his past. Instead, he embraced it, showing that scars didn't erase strength. I'm not here to give the world a scandal, he said softly, his eyes steady. I'm here to remind people that we're all human. We all hurt, but we also all have the power to be kind, to keep going, to respect each other no matter what. The silence in the studio was heavy, but not empty. It was filled with something rare, truth that touched hearts. The interview aired that night, and to everyone's surprise, the reaction wasn't cruel. It was emotional. People flooded the internet with stories of their own losses, their own resilience. The noise of gossip slowly turned into a chorus of respect. And in the middle of it all, Sandra and Keanu found themselves standing closer than ever before. The world had tried to break them apart, but instead, it had pushed them into the light together. Yet even as hope began to rise, a new shadow lingered. Janet's warning still echoed in Sandra's mind. Someone is stirring this. Someone doesn't want you happy. And the question that haunted them both was, who? When truth conquered the storm, the days after the interview were calmer on the surface, but both Keanu and Sandra felt the undercurrent of something unfinished. The world had softened toward them, yes. Strangers wrote letters of gratitude. Fans sent messages of love, and the noise of gossip had begun to fade. Yet in the quiet corners, the feeling lingered that someone was still pulling strings, someone who had tried to use their story as a weapon. Sandra sat at her kitchen table one evening, staring at a letter that had arrived with no name. Her hands trembled as she read the words. You may have won this round, but Hollywood is cruel. It won't let you be happy. She closed her eyes, the echo of Janet's warning filling her chest with dread. The next morning, Janet called with news. I've done some digging, she said. The person behind the leaks isn't a stranger. It's someone who profits from keeping both of you in the headlines. A producer. Someone who's been pitching a reunion project for years. When you didn't agree, they decided to make the story themselves. Keanu listened quietly as Janet explained, but his eyes stayed steady. So it was about control, he murmured. About turning us into a product. Sandra's face tightened with anger. They tried to take our lives, our pain, and twist it into entertainment. Instead of reacting with fury, Keanu surprised her. He smiled gently, shaking his head. Let them try. They don't understand that what we have isn't for sale. His calmness gave her strength, and for the first time, she realized the storm wasn't something they had to fear. It was something they could rise above together. A week later, Sandra and Keanu decided to appear again in public, this time on their own terms. No secrecy, no running, no disguises. They walked together into a charity gala for children's education, hand in hand, dressed simply but with dignity. The cameras flashed, the questions flew, but they didn't hide. They smiled, greeted people, and when asked about the rumors, Keanu answered with quiet grace. Life isn't about rumors, he said. It's about respect, kindness, and the people who stand by you when the world tries to tear you apart. Sandra added, her voice warm but strong. We've shared laughter. We've shared pain, and through it all, we've found that the simplest moments, like being able to trust each other, are what truly matter. The words echoed far beyond the room. Headlines the next day didn't scream scandal. They celebrated resilience, friendship, and love that didn't need labels to be real. Later that night, when the chaos had faded, Keanu and Sandra found themselves standing on a quiet balcony. The city lights spread out before them. Sandra leaned on the railing, her eyes glimmering. Do you realize, she said softly, that after all these years, after all the storms, we're still here? Together? Keanu turned toward her, his expression tender. Maybe that's what happiness is, Sandra. Not perfection, not fairy tales, just two people still standing, still choosing each other no matter what. Her heart swelled at his words. In that moment, the noise of the world disappeared, leaving only the truth between them. It wasn't about fame or headlines or even the past. It was about now. It was about choosing courage over fear, trust over doubt, love over loneliness. As they stood there, the night wrapping around them like a quiet promise, Sandra smiled. Happiness had filled the room that first night they reunited. Now it filled their lives. And for the first time in a very long time, both of them believed that no matter what storms might come, they would not face them alone.